Cyberpunk 2077 has come a long way. First released in December 2020, the open-world RPG was saddled with technical issues, including bugs and very poor frame rates on last-gen console systems. Sony even took the extraordinary step of pulling the game from sale amidst a wave of negative feedback from early players. Some 3 years later, most of those initial concerns have been resolved, and current-gen consoles and PCs are getting a major game expansion, Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty. This expansion promises bold new gameplay features and a brand new storyline, alongside a substantial new playable area to explore filled with side content. It's a major addition to an already large game, and Cyberpunk's only planned expansion. So how does this new release, crafted free of last-gen constraints, run on the current-gen console systems? And does the accompanying 2.0 game update bring any notable changes to Night City? Phantom Liberty takes place in Dogtown, which is a run-down area just outside the boundaries of Night City. It's quite open, with broad streets dotted with huge residential towers, nightclubs, and casinos. On its outskirts, you can find newer settlements, composed of crudely constructed market stalls and street-level restaurants, spilling out from partially destroyed older buildings. The design of these areas is very evocative, and each settlement has a very lived-in character that conveys years of strife and struggle. Dogtown has a very different feeling than Night City, as a walled-off city area with more obvious signs of decay, and it has a much more open and car-friendly layout than most areas in the base game. Dogtown can be quite beautiful, especially at night, when the sparse settlements and markets become bathed in volumetric light. From a technical perspective, the new expansion areas are clearly throwing a lot of geometry around, and they are populated with dense pockets of NPCs. I wouldn't be surprised if the art budgets had been bumped up for this new expansion, especially considering the abandonment of last-gen console systems and the PC version dropping support for mechanical hard drives. Direct comparisons against the base game proved challenging, but I never really felt that the new area was lacking at all in terms of environmental detailing, and I do think that Night City is a bit more restrained in comparison. The actual game content itself is a fun ride and basically plays like a polished action game, which is partly facilitated by the gameplay changes in patch 2.0. There's a healthy degree of side content as well, though I definitely felt like the emphasis was on the blockbuster main story missions. Unlike most DLCs, this is a mid-game addition to the base Cyberpunk story, so you have to progress about 10 hours or so into the main game's plot before you can access Dogtown. For players who just want to jump into the DLC, there's an option to skip straight into the new content from the main menu as well. Jumping into image quality, Phantom Liberty has two modes on each current-gen console, a performance and ray tracing mode on PS5 and Series X, and a performance and quality mode on Series S. Here are the pixel counts I observed on each platform, playing through an early area of the game and trying my best to push it. Some things seem to have changed as of the latest update. Even when looking straight up at the sky, Series S seems to have lower maximum resolutions than prior updates, and the quality mode seems to have a basically flat resolution now. It's probable that the game could go lower than the figures I've included here, of course, but these numbers should be representative of the typical run of play. I did, however, notice in a few shots that the Xbox consoles sometimes had very crude edge detail as I panned the camera rapidly, specifically in dark, low-contrast areas of the screen, resolving to about half of the main resolution of the image. This likely indicates the use of hardware variable rate shading on those systems to conserve GPU performance. I didn't notice the same issues on PS5, so it seems likely that VRS is absent from that version. In actual gameplay though, I didn't find that the VRS was noticeable. There is a significant issue that occurs sometimes where the FSR2 appears to break and re-resolve the image over the next few frames, however, at least on Series S and Series X. This seems most obvious on the 30 FPS modes, and the Series S is the most significantly affected. I didn't notice the issue on PS5, though it may also occur there. Outside of those key changes, the other notable tweak is a change to the basic rendering setup of the game on PS5 and Series X. In the performance mode, Cyberpunk 2077 now has an 1800p FSR2 output resolution, down from 2160p. In stills, the game just looks a little bit less defined now, with a slightly blurrier rendition of fine details. Actually playing the game any sort of reasonable distance from a 4K television, it seems very hard to tell the difference. The FSR2 resolve also has very similar characteristics to before, with a mostly smooth resolve complicated by some shimmer and breakup on fine details. And in a few of the spots where the FSR2 failed to resolve stable detail before, we see the exact same issue recur on the new patch. In performance terms, Dogtown does seem a bit heavier than Night City. I noticed substantial framerate issues during open world traversal on all current gen platforms in their respective performance modes. This was most pronounced on the Series S, which can see extended dips into the 50s, though the more powerful current gen consoles also take some decent hits here. Basically, any time you are walking or driving through Dogtown, especially at speed, the game can't quite seem to keep up. I suspect that these issues are primarily related to CPU performance, given the game's performance profile on the PC. Combat also takes some occasional hits with momentary pockets of dropped frames, though this is less intrusive. The ray tracing modes on PS5 and Series X and the quality mode on Series S run at a stable 30 FPS for the most part. The game can definitely still drop frames here, specifically during fast traversal. I also noticed an extended issue in this market area where framerates tumbled while sprinting through it at times. I think the game plays a lot better at 60 FPS, and the limited ray tracing features on PS5 and Series X don't add much to the presentation, so I'd advise sticking with the performance modes, even though the FPS dips can annoy. The new Dogtown content isn't the only new thing in Cyberpunk this month. Patch 2.0 overhauls the base game, with major updates to the police system, the addition of vehicle combat, improved on-foot firefights, reworked perk trees, snappier car handling, and retooled cyberware and clothing systems. Those are the key developments in this patch, and on the surface any technical adjustments seem pretty minor. If you do load up the same shot across patch 1.63, the patch immediately preceding this one, and the new patch, there are some noticeable differences between the two. Most of the new changes essentially amount to minor aesthetic tweaks that seem very artist-driven. For instance, the vignetting around the corners of the screen, which was pretty subtle before, has been increased quite a bit. Individual tastes on this may vary, but I'm quite sure this has nothing to do with underlying technical changes. The camera angle while driving has also been tweaked, with Update 2.0 displaying a slightly more claustrophobic view of the back of the player car by default. There are plenty of interface tweaks as well, which are obvious in the menus as well as the in-game HUD. There are some subtle changes to in-game assets, but nothing I could reasonably identify as a meaningful performance-driven change. This car in the garage has a slightly different dirt pattern as of patch 2.0, for instance. The curb here has an updated texture, and the police cars appear to have been reworked, with an updated wider front end and projected text along their sides. On the more minor side of things, I did notice some tweaks to the way that Cyberpunk 2077 is color graded across the two patches. This city shot takes on a noticeably warmer tint, for instance. I also noticed a range of subtle tweaks to lighting in some spots, and some occasional tweaks to distant details, though I found it hard to identify any basic tweaks to underlying visual settings that may have produced those changes. I did spot one area that was very noticeably changed, however. In this alleyway, the volume of water mist coming up from the manhole has been greatly increased, with the new mist plume obviously receiving lighting from the red and blue lights on either side. It's possible that targeting more powerful platforms gave the artists additional headroom to throw around potentially performance-taxing effects like these, but it's also a possibility that these changes were motivated primarily by artistic intent. Also notice on the left side here how the blue lights have been doubled up underneath the overhang. In the distance in some shots, you'll be able to spot a revised city silhouette too, as Night City has been updated with a correct representation of the Dogtown area. The above findings come from the PS5 release, but seem to apply equally to the other current-gen consoles as well. PS5 and Series X continue to have very similar visual settings in general, while Series S takes a few quality hits to maintain good frame rates on weaker hardware, as my colleague Tom Morgan has covered before. In terms of the raw pixel counts, I did capture a number of matching shots in Night City across patch 1.63 and patch 2.0 on PS5, and they all came in at or very close to 1440p across both the performance and ray tracing modes. General gameplay in both patches proceeds at 1440p, with substantial dips mostly constrained to busier moments. There's not really much to separate the two patches here, as the typical resolutions appear about the same. It's just the output resolution that has been lowered for the performance mode. Performance in Night City isn't perfect as of patch 2.0, but curiously it does seem quite a bit better. This crowded market, for instance, runs substantially better than before, and this driving run holds a perfect 60 throughout this sequence, while the prior patch had a habit of dropping frames. There is some run-to-run variability here, but it does seem like this patch runs a fair bit better, at least on the PS5. The new patch on Xbox Series consoles doesn't seem to run quite as stably as the PS5 code. Our driving sequence hits some pretty big framerate snags on Series X and has some issues on Series S as well. I definitely felt the game suffering from performance issues somewhat more often on the Microsoft consoles than on the PS5 code, though none of the current-gen consoles are immune from framerate issues in their 60 FPS targeting modes. The 30 FPS modes mostly proceed at a locked 30 FPS as per usual. Cyberpunk 2077 is a much better game than the title that shipped some 3 years ago, and this month's updates represent a high watermark for the title. The gameplay changes in 2.0 make Cyberpunk 2077 feel like a substantially more polished experience, and the new Phantom Liberty expansion is a high-quality addition that I think fans will be happy with. Console players miss out on the ray reconstruction-driven splendor of the updated PC release, but still get a pretty solid experience on the whole here. For any players who have been holding off on playing Cyberpunk, it does seem like now is a very good time to jump in. I didn't encounter any noticeable bugs while playing, and the general flow of gameplay feels much better than the launch game. It's unfortunate that Cyberpunk and its impressive Red Engine tech are seemingly getting a bit of a send-off with this expansion, but I'd say CD Projekt has essentially achieved the vision for Cyberpunk that excited players all the way back in 2018. Framerate issues continue to present problems on current-gen systems, however, with the performance modes suffering from substantial issues during traversal, especially in the new Dogtown content. Outside of some minor aesthetic tweaks and UI changes, it's otherwise not terribly technically different from Cyberpunk after the 1.61 patch, which introduced FSR2-based upsampling to the console versions of the game. That said, the overall game itself has clearly taken a big step forward. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at digitalfoundry.net for exclusive and early access content. And to get in touch, use social media. Thanks for watching.